it's Nicola from Rossell Fitness, and today is our first ever workshop. We're experimenting with this idea of delivering more technique-based workouts and workshops. Basically, our members asked for it, so I think it's something that's important that we work on delivering, because if the members want it, I want to provide it for them. So technique is so incredibly important across the board of all movements that you do, and if you want to develop a better understanding of the particular techniques around certain movements and also how to move safely and carefully, then I think that's a really admirable way to approach your training. So the members voted on what they wanted to talk about first, and what came out kind of at the top of the list of things with the most votes by a long way was understanding a bit more about the core. So I put together some notes, I put together some thoughts, and I'm going to work methodically through that, taking you through an understanding of how kind of the breathing works with the core, how to brace the core, and then moving into particular movements and things that you can do to strengthen and stabilize your core, hopefully to support all of the movements that you do, whether it's in training or just in day-to-day life. So the first question really to consider is, what is the core? You know, most people tend to think that the core is just kind of this bit here, and we kind of always refer to the core as maybe the abs or the midsection of the body. And as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot more to the core than just this kind of superficial layer of abs. So we've got many different layers of muscles in this area. We've got the kind of superficial muscles, we've got the deeper core muscles, the transverse abdominis, we've got the oblique muscles on the side. But what I would also consider part of the core is also the diaphragm that comes in underneath kind of the rib cage here. We've also got kind of the lower back muscles, some of the bum muscles, and the pelvic floor muscles. So if you kind of think of your core as, you know, almost most of your trunk area, from the front around the side into the back, and kind of the muscles that support the kind of upper and lower part when you're taking your breath in. So I should say, if you are watching this live and you want to ask live questions, either on YouTube or Facebook, just pop questions in the box and I can respond to them live. If you're watching this after the fact, when it's been recorded, you can always post comments and questions after and tag me in them, and I'll get back to you as and when I can. So that answers the question as to what is the core. And then it's really something that I think we need to understand all the different reasons why the core is important. So it's, you know, the core, if you're just looking at it superficially, you know, if you're just looking at these beach muscles, it's not so important that that you have this kind of six-pack of abs. That's really not got a great deal of function. Where if we consider the core as a whole, we can start to think, okay, what is the core doing for us, and how is it helping us in our day-to-day lives and in the movements that we choose to do for training. So for things like moving safely, moving effectively and efficiently, having the kind of synergistic connection between left and right side, making sure that we're doing everything in our power to avoid injuries. So if we can build a strong and stable core that we're really connected with, then, you know, all of these things are being supported. Kind of functionality of our movements, the ability to move in the way that we want to move, and also kind of protecting our body and future-proofing our body against possible niggles, injuries, and that sort of thing. So it's important for many reasons, but they're kind of the main ones. And if you can think of any other ones that you want to add to that, just let me know, and we can kind of brainstorm on all the reasons why the core is a valid kind of thing to focus on in your training, and maybe perhaps make it an even bigger part of your training than you have been up to now. So when it comes to looking at whether you need to work on your core or not, I personally would say that everybody could benefit with doing some core work, whether that is more kind of ab focused, whether it's more oblique focused, whether it's more back focused or bum focused, or whether it's more kind of the things that get overlooked a bit, like the pelvic floor or the diaphragmatic breathing. So there's lots of different ways to approach looking at the core, but some of the things that I tend to pick up on as a trainer, just when I'm looking around, looking at people, if I'm doing a movement assessment to a new client, I'll be looking for kind of typical tells that could be things like rounded shoulders. So where kind of your potentially the back muscles and the core muscles aren't really holding us into place, and we're just over the day maybe getting a bit rounded shouldered here, so that we can do things to open out the chest. And if you think about it, really, when you're in this kind of hunched forward position, your lungs are a bit crushed, everything's a bit kind of smushed down. So if we can really work on kind of lengthening the core, opening out through the chest, letting the shoulders come back, we're going to have a much better time of breathing in general and just feeling a bit better. So that's one of the things I look for. Other things are around the pelvis. So when it comes to the pelvis, we can either be kind of pushed that way too far, we can be like a neutral pelvis here, or we can be in this position here where the bum kind of sticks out, where you've got like a tail wagging around here. So the most typical one with the pelvis is that we have this kind of anterior tilt, this kind of tip of the pelvis to the front, which gets the bum sticking out. And what this can actually do, tracking up and down the body. So if we've got this kind of, just even, I'm exaggerating it just for effect here, not quite far away enough. We've got this pressure on the lower back. I can already feel that there when I'm just pushing the bum out. But what this will also do, if we're tipped into that position, what tends to happen is we get this kind of almost a little tracking of the knees. It's not always very noticeable just to the naked eye, but if we look at it biomechanically, we can get this tracking in here of the knees, which then sends pressure down the shins, and it can lead to things like shin splints. So all of this strength and stability around the kind of the tummy, the sides, the back, and the pelvic floor, that's all going to help to keep that pelvis in place, kind of tucked under, not into a posterior tilt here, but just tucked under, supported. These bits are engaging, and we've got a nice supported pelvis, so that we're not kind of falling into these postures that are just not really going to serve us long term. Okay, so they're kind of ways to identify weakness. A couple of other bits as well. If when you're doing core exercises, if you, like for example, the ones where you're lying down on your back and maybe moving your legs around, that sort of thing, if you tend to feel those exercises more in your kind of hip flexors and thighs rather than your abs, that could indicate a potential core weakness or a lack of control around the core. And that is going to impact obviously the effectiveness of the exercise that we're trying to do, and also it can overwork these muscles and create issues with hip flexors, quads, and typically we all tend to be generally a bit quad dominant. A lot of the movements that we do are things like squats, lunges, running, cycling. So we use a lot more of these, and we're not using so much of the hamstrings. So again, if I was assessing someone in terms of the variety of exercise they do and the types of exercises they choose, I might again look, if I was looking at in quite a lot of detail, I might look at kind of their ratio of quad or front, or kind of anterior to posterior movements and strength, and kind of get an understanding of where the imbalances might be coming from. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of what the core is, why the core is important, and how to identify if you are someone that wants to maybe put a bit more time into working on your core and develop a better kind of a better sense of stability and a better sense of strength around those areas. So where I always like to start with the core is with the breathing. So like with everything that we do in life, we need oxygen in the body. We need to feed the muscles and feed the body with really good deep breaths. So just give me a sec. So I want you to take a seat at the moment, whether you sit on the floor, whether you sit on like a cushion or a block, or whether you sit on your sofa or a chair. Just pop yourself onto the floor. You can have your legs crossed or your legs out to the front, whatever feels comfortable to you. Have a little shake off, shift around on the bum to make sure you feel comfortable. And I want you to start to focus on the breathing. Relax the shoulders, just lift the chest slightly. Again, I have a habit of kind of being a bit like this, and when you look at my back in that position, and it's really quite useful to watch yourself on camera, because it's a useful prompt to actually change what you're doing. I will quite often find myself in this position, and I get a lot of pain in my neck, in my back of my shoulders, and around kind of my spine in this middle section here. And when you look at my actual posture when I sit down, is it a surprise that I'm feeling these things? Probably not, because I can already feel, just by being in this position sitting down without lifting my chest, I can feel that my neck is straining, it's getting right into the head, into the base of my skull, behind my ears, and it's already starting to give me a headache. So if we can become more aware of our posture, if we can do just little simple things like if I just lift slightly through the chest, it opens out my lungs, it allows my shoulders to come back slightly. And yet it feels a bit weird. I'm having to use a bit more kind of conscious thought to stay in this position. I will always naturally fall back into this position. It's a learned kind of unconscious behavior. But again, all we can really do with these movements is bring our attention to it whenever we think to, and act on it as much as we can. So coming back to the breath, sometimes it's quite useful with breathing to take one hand onto the chest and one hand onto the tummy. If you would rather have your hands relaxed, that's up to you. I just want you to focus on the breathing, and I'm going to bring your attention to different things that you might be feeling when you're breathing. So we're just going to start breathing in through the nose, and then letting the breath go out through the nose or mouth, whichever feels most comfortable to you. And again, in through the nose and out through the mouth. So I want you to keep your breathing going while I talk. So when you're breathing in, we should be feeling, and it's useful to have the hands here just so you can feel this, the chest and hopefully kind of down through the diaphragm into the kind of, not necessarily the tummy area, but it's kind of around this area, it's going to be expanding. So as you breathe in, your lungs are filling up with air. This is expanding, and hopefully if you're using your diaphragm a little bit to breathe, then you're going to feel the diaphragm kind of pushing down, opening out the chest cavity and allowing the lungs to expand into that space. Then as you breathe out, everything will pull back in, the diaphragm comes back up, and again, everything's kind of starts to, ideally starts to relax as you breathe out. But we don't always want things to relax all over the place. So in yoga, we do tend to say, as you breathe out, relax the muscles. But what we probably want to do in the core training is make sure that we are engaging the core muscles, the trunk muscles, in a kind of a gentle brace. So if you imagine these core muscles here, the side core muscles, maybe even your pelvic floor, as you breathe in, everything expands. And as you breathe out, try and just have a gentle brace of these muscles. And by brace, what I really mean is that you just tense them really gently. So on a scale of like 0 to 100%, we're probably looking at maybe like 20-30% of your effort. So we're not like, because automatically when I'm really trying to tense here, I'm dropping back into that kind of awful hunch posture. So when we're thinking about the breath, we're just breathing in through the nose. And as you breathe out, just pull the pelvic floor muscles in slightly, engage the abs slightly, engage the lateral muscles slightly, and just focus on that as you're breathing out. So this can feel a bit weird, because if we're not used to doing it, then it's going to feel, awkward and a bit difficult. But just as you get used to the idea of doing it, we want to make sure that we are kind of merging that idea of breathing with bracing together, so that if we can do it stationary, if we can do it while we're just sitting down still, then we'll be able to do it much better with more connection in the movements that we choose to do. So we'll just do a couple more breaths here, and then we're going to lie down and do the same thing, and we're going to kind of transition then into a couple of ways that we can start to train the stability into the core. So 1 or 2 more breaths in this sitting down position, get used to how that bracing feels, and then we'll take it down to the floor. So when you feel ready, actually the transition between sitting and lying down is a really nice way to do a core exercise just in a transition movement. So we do this a lot in yoga, and we do this a lot in our training sessions. So instead of just kind of rolling onto your side and kind of going to the floor and collapsing down, we can actually pop a little core exercise in here as we go backwards. So if you put your feet on the floor, sit your bum down, and just send your arms out to the front with relaxed shoulders, and then we're going to send the lower back down toward the floor. So actually what you'll see here is that my back is kind of in this hunched position, but we're trying to roll through the spine in this one. So it's knowing when it's appropriate to have a nice tall posture and when it's appropriate to have a more kind of rounded roll down position. So again, it's, if you're not sure which is appropriate at which time, please ask the question, please let me know, and I'll talk you through it. So feet are down. I want you to pull your pelvic floor muscles in gently. So the muscles down below the pelvis, just kind of pull them in, engage them. And we're going to start to move backwards through the spine. So the lower part of the spine is going to touch the floor first, then the middle, and then when the shoulder blades and shoulders touch down, that is when we can start to relax. So my ab muscles here are engaging, my pelvic floor is engaging. We're rolling back, we're controlling it down. Then you can relax when you touch the ground. And a good way to kind of release off the back is just to rock from side to side to massage the back off. So stay down for me. Just take a few breaths down there. So it's important, if you can't do that roll down, if you aren't able to control yourself all the way down without kind of lifting the legs up or without collapsing back when you get halfway down, then that will be a really good place for you to start with the core training that we want to do to make sure that you have the stability and the control and the kind of protective ability to move from a seated position down to a lying position. So in that lying down position, we're going to put the feet on the floor, let the hip flexors relax. So one of the things that kind of tends to grip on quite a lot is the hip flexors when we're sitting down or standing up or doing stuff. We've got these muscles here that are really kind of grippy. And in this lying down position, with kind of the knees up, with the angle down to the hips here, these hip flexors are nice and relaxed, and they're not necessarily going to be taking on the extra job of doing the core work. So where you put your arms is up to you. You can have them out to either side, you can have them down by your sides, or if you want to, you can again have that connection with your body just so you can feel what's going on. Sometimes it's quite hard to connect with the breathing and connect with the bracing. So if you need that kind of touch connection with the body just for these first few sessions, then just make sure you get that if you need it. So again, we're going to take a few breaths here, breathing in, feel the lungs inflate. Imagine the diaphragm pushing down to open out the chest space. And then as you breathe out, just practice having a little brace with those muscles in the middle section, that trunk section, from diaphragm down to pelvis, around the sides. And on this first level, I want you to practice bracing around about 30% of your maximal effort. So again, we're not kind of going full Hulk and trying to tense every muscle in the body. We're just going at about 30% of our effort. And obviously this is completely subjective to you. So just kind of base it on what you think 30% is. So we'll take a few breaths here. And what we should notice is that it should be fairly easy to, for me, I can do this while still talking. So at 30% of my brace, I can still chat to you. I can still, kind of have, do other things at the same time. Breathing in through the nose and breathing out to just gently tighten those muscles up. I can feel my pelvic floor tightening. I feel my core muscles tightening. Then I go again, breathe in. Try and keep the brace going through the in-breath and through the out-breath. So this is just something that we can practice doing, and practicing it in a lying down position where we're doing nothing else but the brace and but the breathing is really, really important, because when we start to move, we need the foundation in place so that we can confidently move on to the next level. We've got a quick comment on Facebook. Enjoying this so far, Nick. Thank you. Thank you, Jess. You're very welcome. So if you connected well with the kind of 30% level of bracing, we're going to now try and move that up to 40%. And what you might notice, again, it's a subjective, percentage, but what we're just looking at is just increasing that brace to a point where you feel the muscles doing something different. So again, I'm going to practice what I preach. I'm going to do a nice roll down as I go, engage the core. And then I'm going to get into a comfortable position. Again, put your hands where you want to. And we're going to do the same thing, breathing in. And as you breathe out, start that brace. So trying for 40% this time. and trying to maintain that through the next 2 or 3 breaths. So I find it harder at this stage to keep talking to you. So I've kind of reached my limit for concentration in terms of, if I keep talking, I'm not really bracing. So again, this is relevant for understanding that sometimes, particularly when doing core exercises, ideally focusing just on the breath and maybe tuning out everything else that's going on might be quite important. If you see people doing core exercises where they're chatting away to their mates and not really focusing on what they're doing, that could be that they're not actually engaged in their core in the right way. But we all have the ability to brace and concentrate at different levels. So for you might get to 50, 60, 70% of your brace before you start to feel what I'm feeling now. So have a go at going at 50%. So we've gone from 30 to 40 to 50. So we're just increasing the intensity of that brace. As you breathe in, diaphragm moves down, chest expands, lungs expand. And as you breathe out, increasing that brace to 50%. Keep breathing through it and keep those muscles engaged. Do 2 more breaths at the 50%, and then we're going to try 60 and 70. So after the next breath, if you want to, have a little shake off, tuck your knees in, rock from side to side. It's important with this work to take regular breaks as well, because I think, it takes quite a lot of mental energy to do something new, particularly if, like me, when I was introduced to this work, I was a bit like, oh, I haven't been training my core properly all this time. So, it's, like a new skill, any new skill is going to take a lot more brain, just for the first few times that you do it until it becomes more automatic. So again, now let's try doing the 60% brace. So just building that brace up and up and up. Breathing in, everything's expanding. And as you breathe out through the nose or mouth, tightening up the middle, tightening up the pelvic floor, feeling the diaphragm moving up. And then keep the breath going, breathing in through the nose, try and keep the brace there. And as you breathe out, maintain that brace. One more breath here. And breathing out. Have a little shake off at 60, and then we'll try one more level at 70. And then if we've got time, I'm going to show you a couple of progressions that you can do to start challenging your core. So again, get the breath going in through the nose. Visualize the diaphragm moving down, visualize the lungs filling up. And as you breathe out, engage 70% of the brace. Again, so I'm not going to be able to talk to you at all while I do this, because 70% is going to be quite challenging for me. Two more breaths here. Last breath. And then release the brace, tuck the knees into the chest, and have a little rock from side to side to shake yourself off. So I've got about 4 minutes left, and I don't want to rush you through the next progression. So I'll probably almost call it a day here. I'm going to talk a little bit about the spine and the muscles around the spine before we finish. But I'm going to extend this into next week and give these progressions next week, because I think it's important that we get a good grip on what we're doing today, and then use that to inform the session for next week. So I'll extend the core workshop into next week, and maybe even the week after if we've got a lot to talk about. And this will also give you a chance to compile any questions that you might have, and also practice the techniques that we talked about. So the next phase of this is doing the lying on your back exercises with a bit of moving your feet and legs around to kind of test if the brace is strong enough to hold you without moving your spine. So what we're actually kind of trying to do by generating that brace around the core is making sure that when we're lying down, but the spine isn't kind of pushing, kind of the lower spine particularly, isn't pushing into the floor like this or lifting off like this. We want there's a natural curve in the spine. You can see that in my back just by sitting here. There's a natural curve there. But when we do our core exercises, I'm too close to the camera. When we do our core exercises, we don't want the spine to be doing this. Okay, so we don't want to be really driving the lower back into the floor, and we don't want to be having it lift off and kind of overarching through here, because that's just going to cause potential problems in the lower back. So what we can do, we can use the tops of our fingers. So when we're lying down, again, have a little practice with your seated roll down, engage your pelvic floor, engage your core. When we're doing that one, have a little feel under your back and make sure that you can feel where the natural archway is in your lumbar spine, your lower spine. Slide the tops of your fingertips where the nails are underneath there, and that will kind of, so that underneath the muscles either side of the spine, you're not just ramming your hands in, because that will obviously lift the spine up even more, and that's what we're trying to avoid. You're just gliding the fingertips into the natural gap that sits in your lumbar spine there. So when you do these exercises, if you feel that so if, for example, if you don't have the stability that we're looking for, when you start to move your legs around and move your feet around, you may find that the pressure will increase on your fingertips, which will show you that your spine is pushing down. Okay, and if the pressure really starts to release and you don't feel any muscles there at all, potentially your spine is lifting up. So we're trying to avoid this up and down movement of the spine, and having the fingertips there, at least for the first few times that you do it, will give you that sense. If there's too much pressure on the hand, your spine's pushing down into the floor too much, and again, that indicates that you want to work on that bracing and work on the support. And if it's lifting away, again, the stability still isn't there. So we just need to make sure that we're focusing on on the right way of doing it and keeping that brace there to support the spine and the long-term spine health. So hopefully that's been a good intro to kind of breathing and bracing and what the core is and why it's important to train the core. We'll extend this into next week. So I'll make a second part of this workshop where we start to talk about the nice progressions that we can make from that lying down position. So I want you to practice your bracing. If you've got a few spare moments at home, if you're doing any core exercises at home, think about that brace. Think about what percentage of your brace you need for different types of movements. And you can even do it standing up while you're kind of brushing your teeth, when you're cooking or whatever. You can just practice with that breathing, bracing the core at the same time, and getting an understanding of how all the whole body works together to keep you upright and keep you safe. Thank you so much for your time. I hope that's been helpful. If you've got any questions, post them into the comments on YouTube or Facebook, and I will see you next week.